is an answer to the passionate and desperate calls for justice that have echoed across cities large and small for more than a week over the death of George Floyd. 9 days after Floyd died under the knee of a Minneapolis police officer, that now fired officer tonight faces a more serious charge of second-degree murder, as 3 other former officers on the scene that day have now been charged with aiding and abetting murder. The news sparking a new wave of tearful emotion from so many who have marched in George Floyd's name. Minneapolis is where we start tonight with Gabe Gutierrez.
We got all 4! We got all 4!
At the site where George Floyd took his last breath,
We shall overcome.
The moment was cathartic.
I think that it will be a wake-up call for the whole nation.
We're here today because George Floyd is not here.
The state's attorney general announcing new charges for the 4 officers involved in Floyd's death. Charges for fired officer Derek Chauvin were elevated to include second-degree murder. The 3 other officers are now charged with aiding and abetting murder. If convicted, each faces a maximum of 40 years in prison.
George Floyd mattered. His life had value, and we will seek justice for him and for you, and we will find it.
Since Floyd's death 9 days ago, the officers or their attorneys have not publicly commented. All 4 were fired. But only after days of intensifying protests and the burning of a police precinct was Officer Chauvin, the one seen kneeling on Floyd's neck, arrested. Today, Floyd's 22-year-old son, Quincy Mason, visited the makeshift memorial for the first time.
I'm happy that all the officers have been arrested. My father should have not been killed like this. We deserve justice.
The family's statement to those police officers they are just as guilty for the death of George Floyd as Officer Chauvin. They all participated.
As violence has erupted across the country, Minneapolis has watched, prayed, and protested, often peacefully.
It just shows that these protests are working and that they're actually listening to us.
The anger is what many see, but below the surface, pain. Today we met Zoe Schaefer in the crowd, in tears.
I won't be satisfied until I can wake up and have kids and have them not fear their lives just for being black, for being darker than other people. It's not enough. I can say it's not enough. It's not enough. It's not enough until everything changes.
All of the officers are expected to be in custody tonight. Here, the crowd is growing, and a memorial service is scheduled for Minneapolis tomorrow, the first of several services honoring Floyd's life across 3 states over the next week. Lester.
Yeah, and Gabe, I'll be joining you in Minneapolis tomorrow for special live coverage of George Floyd's memorial, then nightly news and an NBC News special in primetime on America in Crisis. For the first time tonight, former President Obama is speaking out about the death of George Floyd and the importance of making this a moment for real change. Our Peter Alexander has late details.
Late tonight, President Obama speaking out during a virtual town hall with young people.
I want you to know that you matter. I want you to know that your lives matter, that your dreams matter, and you should be able to learn and make mistakes and live a life of joy without having to worry about what's going to happen when you walk to the store or go for a jog or are driving down the street or looking at some birds in a park.
America's first black president directly addressing the families of George Floyd and other African Americans whose deaths have wounded the country.
Please know that Michelle and I and the nation grieve with you, hold you in our prayers. We're committed to the fight of creating a more just nation in memory of your sons and daughters.
The former president condemning the violence and looting in recent days, urging demonstrators to channel their anger toward making a change.
In some ways, as tragic as these past few weeks have been, as difficult and scary and uncertain as they've been, they've also been an incredible opportunity for people to be awakened.
While never mentioning President Trump by name, President Obama is drawing a clear contrast between his efforts to build trust between police and communities of color after Michael Brown's killing in Ferguson, Missouri, and the current administration that he says has rolled back some of his policies.
I'm urging every mayor, in this country to review your use of force policies with members of your community and commit to report on planned reforms.
The past president, who recently endorsed his former vice president, Joe Biden, reminding voters change begins at the ballot box.
You have the power to make things better. You've communicated a sense of urgency that is as powerful and as transformative as anything that I've seen in recent years.
And President Obama also acknowledged members of the law enforcement community who he says are just as outraged about the tragedies as the protesters themselves, including those who have marched along beside them. Lester?
All right, Peter, thank you. Tonight, marches and demonstrations are again swelling in cities from coast to coast, largely peaceful as curfews loom once again. We get it all tonight from NBC's Miguel Almaguer.
By taking a knee and laying down, they stood up against injustice. From Los Angeles to Manhattan and the Lincoln Memorial.
Thank you for showing me something different today.
Tensions cooling overnight. Thousands of passive protesters on Portland's Burnside Bridge. In Houston, peacefully chanting for change. A stark contrast to a week's worth of devastating violence. While pockets of unrest erupted later in Portland and Atlanta. Authorities in New York crediting earlier curfews for keeping the peace. Our Ron Allen is there.
A dramatically different scene here over the past 24 hours. Still huge crowds of peaceful protesters, but few reports of vandalism and looting. Police say that curfew has helped them identify and deal with those here to cause mayhem.
In Los Angeles, NBC News given exclusive access to the National Guard, the last line of defense behind a weary police department.
I absolutely support your guys' right to protest. I absolutely support that.
Thousands of citizen soldiers across the country who have hugged, kneeled, and held back crowds, many protecting their own streets, coming face to face with their neighbors in ways they never thought they would.
We're living through history, but we also have a job here, and that's to protect the people and the property of all the Californians here practicing their First Amendment right.
In cities like Los Angeles, the Guard is dispatched to hotspot neighborhoods and city streets 24 hours a day. This is what the iconic Sunset Boulevard looks like right now. The call for help could come instantly.
As the dust settles and cries for justice only grow stronger, a massive crowd gathered in front of the mayor's home in one of LA's most upscale neighborhoods. In Charlotte, police are reviewing tactics used after this video posted on Facebook. Amid accusations, officers trapped peaceful protesters and fired tear gas into crowds. In Philadelphia, the city removed a statue of former Mayor Frank Rizzo, long criticized for aggressive policing of black people. Tonight, the pressure still on, with curfews extended and crowds growing. Cities across the nation are teetering on the edge of unrest.
After so many peaceful protests across the nation, here in Los Angeles, the curfew starts at 9 p.m. The question now, will the peace hold? Lester?
All right, Miguel, thank you. A remarkable voice of dissent tonight within the Trump administration. The Defense Secretary making a public break with the president today on the use of active duty troops against protesters before a reversal late in the day. A chaotic series of events, and Jeff Bennett has the latest now from the White House.
Defense Secretary Mark Esper breaking tonight with President Trump over his threat to deploy active duty troops to put down nationwide protests.
The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort. I do not support invoking the Insurrection Act.
President Trump on Monday threatened to invoke that 213-year-old law during a Rose Garden address, while federal officers used force to clear peaceful protesters from outside the White House.
If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
A senior administration official tonight telling NBC News that Secretary Esper's comments were not well received by the White House. And in an abrupt reversal today, Esper overturned an earlier Pentagon decision to send home hundreds of active duty soldiers who had been rushed to bases around Washington, D.C., with a military show of force already on full display in the nation's capital. Military helicopters flying low Monday night over D.C. streets to disperse protesters. Meantime, President Trump, in a radio interview today, denied reports by NBC News and other outlets that Secret Service escorted him to an underground White House bunker Friday night during intense protests outside the White House.
I wasn't down. I went down during the day, and I was there for a tiny, little short period of time, and it was much more for an inspection.
Sources say the president's frustration with those media accounts are what provoked him to stage that controversial photo op at a nearby church. The White House press secretary today comparing it to world leaders' responses to World War II and the September 11th attacks.
Like Churchill, we saw him inspecting the bombing damage. It sent a powerful message of leadership to the British people, and George W. Bush throwing out the ceremonial first pitch after 9/11.
And late tonight, General James Mattis, President Trump's former defense secretary, breaking his silence, denouncing the president as a threat to the Constitution. In a new op-ed, Mattis writes in part, "Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people, does not even pretend to try. Instead, he tries to divide us." Mattis writes that the country is witnessing what he calls the consequences of 3 years of this deliberate effort.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.